I famously disagree with the official chronology of the MCU. In my opinion, it should be as follows. First Avenger, then all of the Agent Carter stuff, both the 2 seasons of the show and then the one-shot, then Captain Marvel, Iron Man 1, then Iron Man 2, then the one-shot Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Thor's Hammer, then Thor, then watching the Hulk, even though the Hulk, Iron Man 2 and Thor all take place concurrently with each other, but I think watching Hulk last allows for you to know that Tony is a consultant, and then having the consultant come after the Hulk, referencing the fact that Tony Stark walked in, like they call in the consultant, he walks in, annoys Ross enough that he tries to have him kicked out, so Tony just buys the bar. Then would be Avengers, followed quite shortly after by item 47. Then you would have to start breaking things up a little bit more. Then the opening scene of Homecoming takes place immediately then, but as a whole film, Iron Man 3, potentially followed by All Hail the King one-shot, the last of the one-shots, then Dark World, then Winter Soldier, then Guardians of the Galaxy, then Age of Ultron. I think you just watch Phase 2 in release order, because I don't like having, there wasn't really much helping with having Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2, beginning of it all. They were also released quite closely together. Within like the releases, it goes Iron Man 1, Hulk, Iron Man 2. So there's not a whole heap of helping that when you're trying to reorder it for a chronological rewatch. But I think you can do that with the Guardians films. I think you can be like, this takes place here, concurrently on Earth, and you return to Earth for a couple of films, and you go, okay, let's go back, and you leave that like little, I think it's officially supposed to be like a 4-month gap. Something's got to have taken place on Earth in that 4-month gap between Volume 1 and Volume 2. So put some movies in there, break up your Guardians watching, because otherwise you just having all the laughs in one place, and then kind of having to just rely on Luis to get you through to Infinity War when you get the Guardians back. So Guardians of the Galaxy, then Age of Ultron, Ant-Man, Civil War, Black Widow obviously would then go there. I think you then watch Doctor Strange there, introduce the concept of the multiverse. It ends up being around about halfway in the rewatch here, just after halfway. Then you watch Guardians Volume 2, having reached the end of your 4-month break. Coincidentally, it being, it ends up being 5 films, but you are also introducing the multiverse at the same time. So I feel like that's allowed, and it gives you that 4 to 5 film equal to a 4 to 5 month gap between the 2 Guardians films. Then you would watch Homecoming, it being obviously taking place after Civil War, and I think that allows you to sort of watch the intros, be like, yeah, here, look at my home video that I made while I was fighting Captain America during Civil War, and then also giving the precedent to like, oh yeah, no, so like many months later, here we still are. I think that makes a little bit of sense. Then you would watch Black Panther, in my opinion, then Ragnarok, its post-credit scene leading directly into Infinity War, then Ant-Man and the Wasp, although some people say that Ant-Man and the Wasp should be before Infinity War, so I would therefore put it before Ragnarok if that's the case, and you would only watch the post-credit scene after Infinity War. But again, I feel like if you're just going to watch films without breaking them up too much, if you're just going to watch films as a whole, including post-credit scenes, Ant-Man and the Wasp has to go after Infinity War, and it just happens at the same time. Then Endgame, then this is where you start bringing in the Disney Plus shows. I think after Endgame, you would watch WandaVision as a thing that starts to break the multiverse, Eternals as a thing that, you know, fully catches you up on the history of everything, and it being after Endgame, the references to the Avengers being broken up still work. Then you watch Loki, another show. Then you would watch Far From Home. Loki, again, its finale breaks the multiverse. Then Far From Home, it makes sense. Like, we've had WandaVision, we've had Loki. Space gods tried to hatch out of our planet. Like, yeah, no, Mysterio makes sense because it's so totally something the world would believe right now. We've just had an alien invasion followed by a witch with a hex reality in a small New Jersey town. Space gods tried to hatch out of our planet, and not that we would have known, but Asgardians have, from another dimension, has killed the person keeping our timeline intact. So it makes sense for a multiversal being to exist on the planet now. Obviously, that being a fake out, you then watch What If, then No Way Home, followed by Hawkeye, then I think Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and then currently the last in the timeline, I believe, is Shang-Chi. But we're going to talk today about No Way Home, and I'm going to review it for you. So let's get into it. So the Rotten Tomato score for this, the critical score is a 93%, the audience score for it is a 98%, the Metacritic critical score, so the Metacritic score is a 71%, the Metacritic user, also its acronym being MCU, is an 89%, and then the IMDb also gives it an 8.9 out of 10, which equates to an 89%, giving us an average of 88%. So all in all, very highly praised, very good movie, and we're going to discuss why. I've given 10 to its themes. The theme of legacy comes through in so many different ways. What's the legacy of the previous Spider-Man as to how, you know, how well the general audiences love going to watch Spider-Man on screen, the legacy of how well cast previous renditions of characters of villains have been. Like, I think Kevin Feige in an interview at one point said that no one, like you cannot beat Alfred Molina as Doc Ock, and you can't, you really can't. So they always wanted to try and find a way to bring Alfred Molina and Doc Ock into the MCU, and this film gave them that perfect way in. The legacies of the Avengers and how, you know, because like we are in a setting of like the Avengers are no longer, so like, you know, without this big shiny beacon of the Avengers, obviously, the world's, you know, and like it was the Avengers that defeated Thanos. So obviously, you know, that they're going to be highly celebrated, almost deified in this time period, evidenced by the Rogers the Musical stuff in the background, the Statue of Liberty getting a facelift with its oxidization having been taken off it, and the Captain America shield being put on. Yeah, it just, at every point, at every major thing that happens in this film, it's just like, you've got a legacy to keep. even though the whole world knows your identity and they all think you're a murderer and that's currently your legacy that you have, you need to try and find a way to clear your name and therefore restore your legacy. There's even, you know, like, he wants to go to MIT, which is the college that Tony Stark is an alumni of, and Tony Stark was Peter Parker's mentor in the MCU, so there's that legacy continuing, and just, it's everywhere. So the theme of legacy is central to this film, and it works in so many different ways. 10 out of 10. Performances, again, you cannot beat Alfred Molina as Doc Ock. Similarly, you cannot beat Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin. Thomas Hayden Church's motivations as Sandman make a lot of sense. Like, you know, he shows up and he's like, yeah, no, I'm a friend of Spider-Man's, you know, like we left on good terms, but now that I'm in this other universe, I just want to get back to my home universe so I can see my daughter. You know, like, I don't really need fixing, because I don't really die in my universe. I just want to go back and see my daughter. So his performance is brilliant and makes a lot of sense, and like, just starting to get into direction notes here, but and the stunts are just beautiful. The fight choreography is amazing. It's the performances are also 10 out of 10. I don't think I could fault this film on its performances or its themes. Its direction is near perfect as well. I've given it a 9 here. Because again, like I said, when looking at direction, I'm also kind of looking at the story and how it is adapted from the page onto the screen, which is the script's whole purpose of being. But how well does that story translate onto the screen, sort of thing? And I think John Watts, you know, really outdid himself on this film. It's a beautiful piece of cinema. All of the character motivations make sense. All of the relationships between characters make sense, and it's including the multiple Spider-Men. It's such a joy to watch. It's such a joy to watch, and yeah, John Watts did himself proud on this film. So a 9 for that. Cinematography, I'm giving a 9 to, and I'm really gonna just bring this down to how well the action sequences were filmed, and that includes the mirror dimension scene, which I will touch on more in special effects, because almost solely because of that scene, I've given this a 10 out of 10 for special effects, visual effects. I think they did beautifully, and that scene is one of my favorites. It's one of the highlights of this film for me, is the mirror dimension scene. But then, like, the fight scene on the Statue of Liberty is also really good too. And yeah, no, it's just, it's so beautifully shot as well. Like, each shot is perfectly framed. It's the lighting and the exposure and all of, like, the technical details of actually filming something on a camera. They've hit it right on the head. It's so beautifully filmed. So cinematography 9, visual effects 10, soundtrack is a 9. Normally I'm not someone who can pick up on, like, the small details of film scoring, but when it comes to things like comic book characters, you know, like major IPs, they generally have, like, each character generally has their own theme. So, like, whenever you hear, like in this film, when Electro first turns up and he first shoots his first bolt of, like, lightning at Tom Holland's Spider-Man, you get that electronic, like, music that played in Rise of Electro whenever he was being Electro. You would get that playing in all his big sort of moments and stuff, and it was really good to be able to be like, yes, they've kept, like, the essential flavour of Jamie Foxx Electro, tweaked him ever so slightly to fit in to this universe, and it's almost perfect. I think the only thing that could have made the music better is if they'd actually had a proper, like, Spider-Man theme in there somewhere, because if I remember correctly, Homecoming and Far From Home had that theme as the Marvel Studios logo, and this one had the audio from the post-credits scene to re-establish, like, this is where we're at, remember, so, like, we're giving you the setting, because it's not important that you see all of that, it's the dialogue in that moment that's the most important thing. And so that's the audio for the Marvel Studios logo. And yeah, I don't think we actually get a Spider-Man theme at any point. If we do, I am not remembering it currently. Production design gets an 8. I think it would have been cool to see, like, we kind of almost get the, like, purple hooded robed Green Goblin from the comics. I don't, from memory, I don't think he ends up keeping the hood on in his final, like, in his final costume. Electro gets the comic accurate mask and colouring, but the mask is more caused by electricity when he first sort of appears, and is therefore a visual effects thing more than a production design thing. Because I'm really looking here at, like, costumes, makeup, like the physical elements of production design. Yeah. I don't know. I think there's some things that they could have done to make it a little bit better, like, but that being said, still a beautiful film. All of the costumes are still amazing. All of the like, all of the scarring and stuff that they put on characters, which is all makeup as well, is all beautiful and realistic, and, you know, the way you would want it to be in a high budget film like this. So there's not really a whole heap to fault, but I did give production design an 8. Marketing, I gave an 8 to as well. They alluded to many of the big reveals in the trailers, and then there was the leak of an extra couple of seconds of the Spider-Man jumping at Electro Sandman lizard shot that shows you the already pre-rendered lizard being kicked in the face, which obviously led a lot of fans to be like, yeah, no, they're definitely in this, because, like, who else is kicking lizard in the face, and why isn't Electro coming down at Spider-Man? Why is he still sort of flying across the top of the screen? And then they had, I think, too much of the scene that involves Aunt May's death. in the trailers. So they kind of gave away all of their big reveals. Like, we're gonna get Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, Aunt May's gonna die, and like, you know what I mean? I think if they picked one villain, or maybe two, and just focused on them, and not given, you know, and had one of them not be Green Goblin. So you take away that whole scene that involves Aunt May's death because you're not looking at Green Goblin. You can still have, you know, Peter running through Feast. You can still have, you know, the bombing at Happy's condo. You know, you can still have those sorts of elements because there's a Feast truck there, so it's like, okay, so obviously one of these villains is attacking Feast for some reason. Like, you could have, left it a little bit more open to like what villains are going to be in this from the multiverse, because I think it could have been really cool, especially if you had a little bit more Feast in the trailers, even with things like, you know, there being green flames for some reason at the condo. You could have been like, yeah, no, like maybe Mr. Negative's in this from the video game, because he founded Feast in that game. It was you know, he was the one that sort of built Feast, and then he can make, you know, black and white flames. So, you know, maybe his attack when it hit something looked green next to the other orange flames, sort of thing. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, I think there could have been a way that they concealed. And if you're only focusing on Electro, you'd end up taking out that whole shot of Sandman and Lizard, when that reveal wouldn't have happened. And things I would have changed. However, they still work perfectly as hype machines, which is ultimately their goal for this film. And they don't give away the one scene that has Charlie Cox, Matt Murdock in it. But then Kevin Feige did that in the press tour. He just sort of like let that ball drop, like, oh yeah, no, if we have Daredevil back, don't know when he's going to turn up, but it will be Charlie Cox. And then the Sony exec laughs because he's obviously in this film and she knows that. So some things I would have done differently as far as marketing is concerned, but still works perfectly as a hype machine. So we got an 8 for that. Continuity, it poses no issues to the timeline, even if we assume my disagreed timeline from the beginning of this video. It still fits in perfectly fine, even if you're watching it as the last film. Like, if you're like anybody else and you just sort of go, yeah, no, like the first scene, as in Homecoming, can be set in the past, but the most of the film is set present day being in release order, sort of thing. So even if your rewatch is only got Captain Marvel and Black Widow sent back in time, and you're watching this as the last film, it still doesn't pose any issues to any sort of timeline. Continuity in this film is perfect. So yeah, and as a concept for a celebration, like a love letter film to the character of Spider-Man and the people who have played major roles in this. I mean, we didn't get an Emma Stone, Gwen Stacy, we didn't get a Kirsten Dunst, Mary Jane, we didn't get a James Franco or a Dane DeHaan, Harry Osborn. But other than the best friends and the love interest characters, we got every other major character except for like, actually no, that's incorrect. We didn't get Rosemary Harris or Sally Fields, Aunt May's either. Yeah. I do think we got a tease for who the villains are going to be in the next trilogy, though. I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, no, it's a beautiful, like, the concept of like the multiverse is broken, and this is going to come into like Multiverse of Madness is like the bill has come due. Thank you, Mordo, for that line. So like this is like the straw that breaks the camel's back as far as Doctor Strange is concerned, and that's how it's gonna fit into the continuity going forward as well. So again, 10 out of 10 for continuity. But the concept of this piece, as like, you know, I would have loved for it to explore the web of life and destiny as far as exploring the multiverse is concerned. Even if they just referred to it as the cosmic web, which is a real life thing. That's what it looks like. We aren't even a pixel in this, when that's small in the grand scheme of things. But they didn't explore that, and I think that's my only complaint as far as the concept of exploring the multiverse is concerned. So all in all, perfect concept, perfect execution, 10 out of 10. This gives us a total Oslo of 93, Oslo being a one screw loose overall score. So we got an Oslo of 93, which compared to our total average of 88%, pretty good. 5 points higher, but when you've only got 12 points to be higher, means that the gap's not going to be that great, and also means that we have perfectly met up with the Rotten Tomatoes critic score. And since we broke this down and did a full in-depth critical analysis, I think that tracks. So yeah, let me know what rank you think this film should have got in the comments down below. But now let's actually talk about some of the things that happened, because this film was insane. So as I mentioned before, Charlie Cox came back as Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, from the Netflix series, opening the gateway fully after Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin was seen in the last shot of episode 5 of Hawkeye, and then he's the first character we see in the finale, as well as the last character we see in New York in the finale. Obviously the last scene of the finale being back at the farm sort of, you know, makes that differentiation there. Obviously, as I mentioned before, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield come back as their respective Spider-Man. Aunt May dies and gives the line, the most comic accurate version of the line, and that is to say, word for word, that with great power must also come great responsibility. And then she dies the same way both Uncle Ben's died when they gave their version of that line. They died the same day. So as soon as she said that, it's like, yeah, no, she's about to die. Zendaya's Michelle Jones, aka MJ, happens to have the last name Watson. So it's unclear if Jones is just sort of like an unusual middle name, or if her last name is hyphenated. I kind of opt more for the hyphenated name, and she just, you know, the Watson's her, you know, like, let's say for instance she might live with her mum, Watson might be her dad's name, she doesn't want to associate with her dad for whatever reasons. There's some character backstory to explore there in the next trilogy. Thank you. Means we're getting Zendaya back, as well as some character development for Ned Leeds, who, as the best friend to Spider-Man, has promised not to become a supervillain and try to kill him the way Ned Leeds' Hobgoblin does in the comics. So that's been set up as well. So Ned's gonna be back. We might even get to see Jacob Batalon slowly become a frat bro and get jacked during MIT in order to be able to go toe-to-toe with Spider-Man when he rediscovers that Spider-Man's Peter Parker, regains all of his memories of Peter Parker, and feels betrayed that he didn't come and find him and tell him that this is what's happened, and that, like, Doctor Strange is behind the memory charm, but I asked him to, and here I am, undoing it on only the people I want to undo it on. I could see that going. Electro voices a dissatisfaction or a bit of a disappointing fact that Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, despite being from Queens, isn't black. Only to then follow that up with, you know, the certainty that somewhere out there in the multiverse there's a black Spider-Man. Which reminds us that the MCU has Donald Glover playing Aaron Davis, also known as Prowler, the main villain and antagonist to Miles Morales' Spider-Man. So could we get the Kid Arachnid in the MCU? Looking like it. It's looking like it. Either that, or since we still haven't gotten our Spider-Man in the Venom universe, are they just going to establish that Spider-Man as being Miles Morales from the beginning? That could be kind of cool. Speaking of the Venom universe, Venom appears in the post-credits scene, the only one. The second one was just the trailer for Multiverse of Madness. I think when they release this film on DVD and Blu-ray, the trailer's not going to be on there as like a post-credits scene. But it just made the most logical sense to not release the Multiverse of Madness thing until afterwards, considering the fact that it takes place after the events of No Way Home, and therefore the trailer itself, potentially, if you haven't seen the film, could have been spoiler material for the film. So I don't think that the trailer is going to be in the DVD Blu-ray edition. I don't think that's the case. But Venom is in the mid-credits scene, and when he finally fades back to his own universe, he leaves behind a small little drop of Venom, which doesn't make sense, because again, his universe doesn't have a Peter Parker Spider-Man, so the only way he was able to get through to the MCU because of the spell is due to his multiversal hive mind knowledge through Venom, because Topher Grace's Venom knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man in Spider-Man 3, so that's how that Venom was able to come across, which means that the Venom symbiote should have gone back, which leads me to believe that that goop of Venom left behind, the way it's sort of shot is that, like, yeah, it's part of the Tom Hardy Venom. Here he is. Kind of says to me that, yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're gonna set the Clintar up to be like extra-dimensional beings rather than extraterrestrial beings in the MCU, and that's how they fit the definition of alien. it's not that they're foreign to the planet, it's that they're foreign to the universe, which, if you ask me, kind of feels like a bit of a setup to the Annihilation Wave coming through all universes, which fits to what I think Phase 4, Phase 5, the multiverse saga is gonna end up having as its big, like, Infinity War Endgame event at the end of it all. But we'll see. We will have to see. I don't know. But we have some symbiote goo, at least, in the MCU now, if there wasn't already a whole race of it before, which gives the question of who that's going to go to. Obviously, they could just cast somebody to play Eddie Brock, and he might be another MIT student in the next trilogy, or they could give it to Flash Thompson and make him Agent Venom. It'd be cool if he just sort of started off as Venom, like obviously Peter Parker gets it first, then it goes to Flash, finds itself a little more compatible with Flash than it is with Peter Parker, but having already gained, you know, like, I guess flesh memory, muscle memory of Spider-Man's moves, allowing Flash to become his own Spider-Man. But I think that owing to the fact that he would get his Spider-Man powers from an alien, he will get approached by Nick Fury, potentially recruited into Sword, and therefore become Agent of Sword, Venom, Agent Venom. And that's how they'll get that name onto Flash Thompson's version of the character, which is kind of cool. MIT was the university and the college that they wanted to go to, and at the end of the film it's shown that MJ and Ned got in. It shows Peter moving into a unit that looks eerily like the one from the video games, hence why I brought the video games up earlier. It looks incredibly like the one that Miles helps Peter move into, that Peter helps Miles move into. I don't know which way around that goes, but owing to the fact that Miles is still living with his mother in the Miles Morales game, I'm gonna say Peter. It looks a lot like that apartment. So I'm just gonna, it's just headcanon that it's that same apartment to me. But it shows that he has a GED study guide in the top of one of his boxes, so that's like his first priority as far as Peter Parker stuff's concerned, as well as he finally just hand sews his own Spider-Man suit the way the others did, having learnt all the lessons that he had to from them, to become the superior Spider-Man. And I really hope that that's the name that they give to the next trilogy, is the Superior Spider-Man, or the Spectacular Spider-Man, or something like that. We've had the Amazing Spider-Man, but I think getting like the Spectacular Spider-Man would be really cool, even if they then also get home-themed subtitles, similar to like Homecoming or Far From Home or No Way Home. Even if home is still in the title, I think calling this next trilogy Spectacular Spider-Man could be kind of cool. But if it means that Spider-Man Peter Parker ends up getting into MIT, that continues the legacy theme, because his own mentor was an MIT alumni, as I mentioned before. It also means that Ironheart could appear in that one of those, you know, probably the first film, as just like Riri Williams could just show up, explain that she got dusted 2 years after her project was funded, you know, making her like a third year student, and then essentially only like 2 years, 3 years older than Peter Parker, so still roughly the same age. And then being that her project that was funded and approved through the September Foundation grant in Civil War was just an Iron Man suit for a woman, specifically Riri herself, it could mean that Tom Holland, who had Iron Man as his actual mentor, and Riri could team up and therefore go on to be members of the Young Avengers, who I think, being an actual Avenger, gives Peter sort of leadership, with second in command going to Kate Bishop. I don't actually think Yelena's going to be on the Young Avengers team. I think she's going to end up on the Thunderbolts, unfortunately. But since Kate wasn't approached by Val, Kate's not on the Thunderbolts team like some people have speculated. She's a Young Avenger. So that's kind of cool. And it has been, at least I believe it has been confirmed, that we will be getting a Raimi Maguire Spider-Man 4 following the aftermath of No Way Home, in which there is a living Norman Osborn, there is a Dr. Octopus that isn't being controlled by the AI in his own tentacles, and that has a depowered Flint Marko just, living his life with his daughter. And I think that'd be interesting to see, how chronically different is his universe now that those things have changed. Or is it gonna be a case of he's still in his universe where they did die, and Sandman is still a character that exists, but because if he ends up in a one with a living Norman Osborn, it means Harry never discovered the Green Goblin identity and never wanted to kill Spider-Man, meaning that they were always best friends and never really had anything to hide, and it's just a case of, by the way, I'm Spider-Man, and then Harry knows. Would have meant that Doc Ock fully regained control of his tentacles rather than had to fight with their, and I think this is the main difference between what would have happened, what did happen in Spider-Man 2 and what would have happened now in Spider-Man 2, is that with now the inhibitor chip reinstalled and working again, he wouldn't have had to drown himself to destroy the AI in the arms. He would have been able to destroy the machine and then climb back up, being fully in control of his arms. So there would still be a living Otto Octavius. And then that means that realistically the only villain that could still be... No, even then, they destroyed the Venom symbiote in that final film, didn't they? So it basically erases all of the known villains in his universe. So do we just sort of get reintroduced to a new sort of variation of the Raimi universe, but with those three particular characters alive and all of the repercussions because of that now main continuity, and just go straight into Bruce Campbell was Mysterio and John Malkovich is the Vulture? Do we go that way? Or because we've already seen those villains on screen, do we instead get a, Kraven the Hunter, or a, what are some other villains? Where's my little key? Do we finally get Rhino as a major villain, rather than just sort of he shows up at the end for the last shot of the film in Amazing Spider-Man 2? Like, do we actually finally get a Rhino? That'd be kind of cool. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I hope they also decide to now revisit the Amazing Spider-Man universe as well, and the Andrew Garfield one, because even though Electro would now be depowered and therefore wouldn't die, and even though Lizard got cured like he did before anyway, although he'd come back before he tried to turn the entire city into lizards, so there's that. Dane DeHaan still would have become Green Goblin. So the only difference would be whether or not Gwen had enough time. It's like, okay, cool, well, I'm not needed here anymore, so I can leave, thus sparing her fate. You know, and it means that Dane DeHaan's Green Goblin would never know that Peter was Spider-Man. I also think that in hindsight, maybe being like, you know, knowing that it was specifically Peter's blood that unlocked the Spider-Man powers, so it's specifically Peter Parker's blood that's needed to cure the disease that is genetic in the Osborns in that universe. Does that mean that, you know, he would have gone up and been like, hey, I had to go away and think about it for a second, but I'm actually Spider-Man and I will help you. You can't have my blood. I thought about it and it will cure you. So, like, here, let's go and do it right now. The camera stopped recording. But in hindsight, is Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man gonna give his blood over, thinking that that's gonna be what helps save Gwen Stacy from dying, thus being able to save his MJ the way he did Tom Holland's MJ? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is there that redemption for him, and therefore he never goes down that dark path? You know what I mean? Like, is it gonna reinsert him at, like, this is right here. From here on is the point you need to fix from. In the same way that, like, is that gonna be the same case for Tobey Maguire? Is he gonna get reinserted at a particular point in this new universe, sort of thing, that's now his main universe? Like, it's just, I want to go and revisit them. I want to see what they do with them. I'm looking very forward to it. I don't think that they're going to use Kraven the Hunter as a major villain, only because they are doing a Kraven film. But one of the characters, one of the people in the sky, during the multiverse fracturing at the end of the film, one of them is Kraven the Hunter. You can see him standing there with his big spear. One of them is Scorpion, who already exists in the MCU and wants to, quote-unquote, put Spider-Man's head in the dryer. And one of them is Rhino, like a comic-accurate Rhino, making me wonder if those are going to be our villains in the MCU. Not so much Kraven the Hunter, as I mentioned, Sony already has plans for him, but is our MIT era, or ESU era, Spider-Man gonna have a Rhino, a Scorpion, and then a Hobgoblin in like his final year of MIT? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Can't wait to find out. And then the last thing I'm going to sort of just touch on very quickly before I sign off is who our actual Sinister Six was in this film, because we did have a Sinister Six. it wasn't a Furious 5. So in order of appearance, we had Doc Ock, who got fixed by having his new inhibitor chip installed. We had a Green Goblin, who was actually the last to get cured, but he did appear second, and he had the anti-serum given to him. We then saw Lizard, and again, he got anti-serumed, but in a gas form as opposed to a liquid form. We had Electro, who was fully reverted back to human form and had all of the electricity dissipated from his body. And then we had Sandman, who was particle decelerated out of being able to manipulate sand. Because as he mentioned, he fell into a particle accelerator. So his particles just decelerated with the light. I gotta imagine that's the case. And then our sixth member was Tom Hardy's Venom. Watching the post-credit scene of Venom at the Big Carnage, he licks the screen in an almost like Venom likes to eat brains kind of way. And then right before he vanishes, Venom's like, we better go speak to this Spider-Man guy. Like, let's go. So it kind of seems like Venom was like, I want to attach to him. I want to find out what makes him tick. I want to, like, get Spider-Man powers, basically. And I think that that's why he left a part of himself in that universe. I gotta feel like when he deliberately detached that part of him, that became its own entity that just goes by the name Venom as well. In the same way that Carnage is essentially just Venom in Cletus Cassidy. The way that the logic of that film tracks. So, by the same logic, this new little blob of goo is not Venom. But Venom was our sixth member. The Lethal Protector wanted to lethally protect Tom Holland for a little bit to gain some Spider-Man powers so that he was evenly matched when he took him down, I think. Also, it just would have been really funny to see Tom Holland and Tom Hardy share a scene together. Only thing that could make it funnier is if Tom Hiddleston was also there, because then you'd have the three superhero Tom H's in a scene together. It's almost like having a scene that has Thor, Captain America, and Star-Lord in it together, because they're all named Chris. But yeah. Anyway, that's all I've got for this film. I know it was a long one, and kind of why I said film there, not video. But if you enjoyed it, please give it a big thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, it would be greatly appreciated, and ring that notification bell, turn on the push notifications. It'll keep you in the know when I upload new videos. Once again, let me know what, how well you thought this film did, what your ranking would have been. What do you think the correct way to rewatch the MCU is, and why? And what do you, what's Spider-Man project that has been announced are you most looking forward to? Is it the second trilogy of MCU films? Is it a continuation of the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire films? Is it a potential continuation of the Mark Webb, Andrew Garfield films? Is it Morbius? Is it Craven? Is it potentially a Venom 3? What are you looking forward to? And until next time, guys, keep your head screwed on.